All right, welcome back to Broadband Heroes, another episode and another hero. I'm Nick, your host, with my co-host.
Jade Pyrus de Carvalho,
There we go.
Broadband Advocacy and Partnerships at Bonfire Infrastructure Group.
And we are super excited to have a true hero from the amazing state of North Dakota with us here, Mr. Brian Newby. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, Brian Newby, State of North Dakota Broadband Program Director. Glad to be on.
Awesome. Well, I think there's obviously a lot going on in the world of broadband. And as for those of you who listen to our podcast know, we always like to try to provide some insights, some education, a little bit of humor. And I think given that, we have a pretty big event coming up in the next couple of weeks, and I'm not talking about Halloween, that's going to affect, I think, a lot of things. But before we get into any of that, as a broadband hero yourself in your role, yeah, tell us a little bit about like what are you guys doing over in North Dakota?
So, in North Dakota, we have what I'm learning in a lot of states in the same place. We have about 99% of our locations that are served. We're going through the process right now of finalizing the challenge adjudication, getting it back from NTIA, and then we'll know exactly the number of locations. But North Dakota is unique in that it has most of its locations served by the investment telephone companies and also the ILECs and then also the internet service providers that are in North Dakota. And they've invested a lot of money already to put fiber everywhere. So North Dakota not only is about 99% served, it's mostly served by fiber. There are some pockets of fixed wireless. And
Nice.
so one of the things we want to do is kind of finish the job, and when I say that, that's a job that they've done. There's a common belief like, oh, look what we've done in North Dakota, and I would say that saying we hit 99% is like saying Brian Newby and Aaron Judge combined for 58 home runs. We haven't done anything. It's all been the local phone companies in the state that have got us to this place. And I think I'm sure we'll talk about it some, but one of the things with BEAD and the programs right now is we've gone for a long time without even giving out any money. And we're probably a year or two out from that as it is. And that's frustrating because we want to be responsive to the carriers to get this job done. And I think that is one challenge we face because I think sometimes we are the face of that delay as opposed to NTIA. And that's kind of an unfair place to be, but that is one of the things we have to deal with.
When you said that, you made the comment about the job not being done. I mean, what is the job of broadband advocacy and broadband development? Is it ever done?
Well, it's like laundry. I used to use that one. You're never done with laundry.
Yeah.
When you think about it, you've always got to do it again. You're wearing clothes or whatever. So I think there is some question: can you even get to zero to begin with? About eliminate all the unserved and underserved homes or locations. That's that's questionable whether you can get there. I think the leap, maybe to talk about, you know, advocating for broadband, some of that kind of stuff that gets into digital equity. I don't think that would ever be done. I think that's where we probably are more focused on how we can be carrier responsive. We'd love to see all of our BEAD money go to carriers. I think there's a lot of avenues, a lot of places, a lot of organizations that are going to continue the beat the drum on digital equity well beyond this project.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that you raise about never being done because I think that even when BEAD is over, and let's say every state and territory meets its goal, right? Then it becomes very apparent that the maps upon which we based this work aren't necessarily accurate, right? And so that there's that. And then there's the digital equity piece of, okay, everybody has access from an infrastructure point of view, but do they know how to use it? Can they afford it, etc.?
And by math, you mean the speeds?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just the FCC map. How accurate do you think
Oh,
that
the
is?
map. I thought you meant the math. The math. The map is one thing, but no, I think the other issue too is that you hear this all the time where broadband is trying to be compared to it's just like electricity, and I disagree. I think I reject that comparison because we have electricity that comes into our home, and we don't have to make decisions on whether we power air conditioning or the refrigerator.
Hmm.
Oh, good
So
point.
the idea that we would be talking about, well, I only need this speed is it the same as the way electricity is? I think we should expect a funnel coming into our home or our business, and the applications would spin off of it. And it does seem that we're hunkered down. I think as government people, this is natural, but we're hunkered down into implementation, execution of a program. But I don't know that we as an industry, I don't feel are that visionary. We talk about, oh, the next thing we're going to need is symmetrical gig. We don't talk about applications that are being driven by end users and how that's going to drive internet usage. And I think those visionaries have to be out there. I used to work at Sprint. I know that there are a lot of thought leaders in the broadband space, but I don't think we're getting the exposure to that in the grant area. And so some of it just ends up being, oh, what are we going to do next for speeds, as opposed to looking at the true big picture. And I think that gets to more of what you're saying too, is that ever ending? No, but I don't know that we can articulate it beyond the way we talk today, like speeds or digital equity. There's probably applications that we're not even fathoming that potentially could drive internet usage in ways that we can't even conceive right now.
Yeah.
Especially AI. I mean, there's things that are going to be invented that we haven't even thought of for sure. So I guess, Brian, on that note, I mean, you brought up Sprint, and I obviously worked in the private sector and now in the public sector. How has that changed your approach? Because I mean, not all broadband directors have worked and have the same level of private experience. So I mean, how does seeing both sides of the fence affected your, I guess, your thought process and your style of pushing out broadband for North Dakota?
Well, so I worked at Sprint for about 20 years. I started working there right out of college and kind of evolved from public relations to business development and then into the wholesale group and eventually strategic planning overall. But so I would say that because of wholesale, our customers were carriers. And I definitely believe that impacts the way I've looked at this job, because I want to understand the drivers of the business for carriers. I want us to be known as pro carrier. I think that if we don't have the carriers on board, it's a little bit like having a sales force and your marketing. If your sales force isn't on board with your plans, your plans are worthless, and you're not going to achieve what you want to get done. And so, from our standpoint, I think we really need to work with the carriers and earn their trust so that they can truly deliver what we're hoping to get to, and that is service to the end user. On the government side, I left Sprint and I was in elections. I was Johnson County Election Commissioner, which is the biggest jurisdiction in Kansas, for about 11 years. Did that pretty well. And
Kansas. We
yes,
didn't cover this, but you're a Kansan.
well, technically I'm a Missourian. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri.
Oh,
I went to the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and I moved to Kansas in the 80s. So I think I lived in Kansas longer than I lived in Missouri, but I am the only person you'd actually meet from Kansas City who actually was born in Kansas City. Um,
Yeah.
so the but then I went to Washington D.C. I was executive director of the Election Assistance Commission, and you may have seen this a little bit, but I think Washington D.C. is a bit political. Up till then, like I felt like corporate politics was actually a little bit harder than real politics. I think when you get into the DC level and you see that people are there for different reasons, it was not. I love DC as a city. I was served my term and I was very happy to kind of move on. And then I went to North Dakota in elections as well. But I've really been now in government roles for about the same time as private sector, and they are different. But the private sector seems so long ago. It's harder and harder for me to see how they're different. Other than I always start kind of with money and think about the financial drivers of businesses, and I want to understand that, and I think that will help us in our jobs here.
Yeah, well, there are so many questions around public trust regarding elections, right? And you live that and breathe that. How do you take those lessons and translate those into the work you're doing on the broadband side?
It's really weird because it at first I didn't see many parallels, but
hmm.
I do see many over time. I have this imaginary voice from my dad who died long ago, but so he never said this in a conversation. But I always thought of him saying, well, Brian, elections involve politicians, so of course they're going to be political. And so that was kind of how I thought it'd be different in broadband. But some of the same battle cries are said in broadband that they're said in voting. And frankly, I believe them more in voting than broadband. Uh, I think we're in elections. You're satisfying a basic constitutional right, And I don't think there's anything more noble in government than working in elections, frankly. So when I hear about broadband and getting people broadband service, I think that's important, but I definitely balance it against that life I've had before. And I do believe it changes lives, but it's just a little bit different to me. I think personally, I think it's important, but I think voting is more important, really, in our society. And yet, what I've seen enough now is to start seeing the signs when something is very political, where maybe I didn't see that as much in elections. And election administrators are the least political people you'll ever meet, because
Hmm.
really all they care about is making sure that if you want to vote, you have access, and they'd love high margins and high turnout because they don't want to do any recounts. That that's all they care about. They don't even know who the candidates are, and so I'm a little more savvy to the politics going on now that in broadband, seeing that. And there are a lot of parallels over, some of the same organizations are involved. I think we see some of the stuff coming from the NTIA, which is truly just political, and you kind of have to recognize it for what it is. And the transparency in elections is something kind of just even today I've been thinking about it more is missing. Even I think you'll hear a common theme always. I'm kind of critical of NTIA, that their transparency, it's not the transparency of some of the processes we have to do, but we have no idea of some of the backroom discussions and why it takes. I'm living today on the fact that we submitted our digital equity proposal in at the end of May, and after we thought we were done with curing, we just got some other things to do before and NIST has curing, and so we're going to be entering our 6th month of curing on the proposal, and that's common with all NTIA things. And so you kind of like, where is the transparency, understanding how that's all playing out? And I find myself kind of critical of some of those things because I've seen the transparency we had to have in elections.
So knowing that obviously people are very skeptical of politics, right? So it's trying to build trust. What do you think needs to be done, or maybe what have you done in the broadband space to try to get the end consumer, not the carriers, but the communities, to get them to say, hey, you know what? I have trust in the state broadband office. I have trust in the state government that they're going to be doing the right thing for me.
Yeah, I think it's a totally different thing though. Like I told you, we're 99% there. The
Yeah.
typical North Dakotan wouldn't even know that we have a broadband
Yeah. Okay.
office. And so, and I think for us, we want to be very transparent with the carriers, and it's hard because like the challenge process, we wrapped that up end of August, and we're still waiting to hear final results on that to be able to communicate that with them. And
You mean
you know,
final results from the NTIA?
yeah, yes, and
Yeah.
we consciously though did not. We know how we presented it to the NTIA, but we decided it wasn't going to be official until they approved it, the outcomes, because we've seen enough changes, and we didn't want that kind of stop and start, which would create distrust. So we've been kind of hanging loose. One of my things with NTIA is, well, I think there's a whole Stephen Covey phrase: you put good people in bad processes, and you get bad results.
Yeah.
And I don't have any issue with the people in NTIA. In fact, as far as I can tell, they put very few resources facing what we're doing. I don't know where the rest of the resources are. And so we have one person who is working on the challenge process for several states. And I don't understand that, why they don't throw, more people at it. And but that's the kind of thing that trying to explain that to our carriers is hard for them to, to believe. It just appears to be us. And we don't have any other defense other than they're kind of waiting.
So as a comparison, I mean, what type of resources do you have in your office to be able to support that broader communication to the carriers?
So we're pretty lean. In fact, we have two full-time positions, mine and broadband manager Brian Newby, and our state is one that doesn't like to hire full-time people because there's at least our legislature, there, we're really reluctant to commit dollars to something that has a long tail.
Hmm.
And so we have um, an augmented staff. We use Guidehouse, which has been awesome. This project, and Guidehouse is, their model, which is really like other consultants, is more of a swarm. They can throw bodies at, everything's time and money, right? You can throw more people, you parallels of elections, like you have election workers 300 voting locations, you can also that'll help people vote faster. If you have 50 locations, it's not going to be the same. How you spread out all that. And so for Guidehouse, they have a core group that they focus with us, but they can kind of flex if they need and have more people involved. They've been helping us with capital projects fund items as well as BEAD and DE. But we just kind of have a core team of about 5 people from Guidehouse plus us. They're awesome, and so that's what we've been utilizing to communicate with everybody. And I definitely could do better in terms of some of our, I'd say, end user communications. But then I would question what we really have to communicate.
Hmm.
Like, hey, someday if you don't have internet, long time from now, can't say when, you might have it. Depends on when this goes. We're waiting for a map to see if you really don't have it. I mean, that, there's really not a message that you can send that's going to make people kind of sway hearts and minds on that kind of thing.
How long have you been at the office?
So I started in March of 23. I was the elections director at the state here for about 3 years before that. Just on a real personal level, I'm Jade. You probably don't know. I had very serious cancer. Had about 18 inches of my colon and intestine, all that removed, and I would be very proactive in telling people to be screened for all that stuff. All healthy now, all strong,
Oh, great.
and but I saw a lot of people in elections, people who worked for me, people in the office beforehand. They're all cancer. A lot of people are afflicted with cancer. Elections is a very stressful situation. And so, I'm a believer that people, if you're worn down, you're more likely to be prone to something cancerous
Hmm.
related. And so,
Yeah.
kind of as I was recovering after the hospital, I did what anybody would do, just made a whole career change. And that's when I moved to broadband. And so I was brand new to that office, right, early March, right after coming off that surgery.
So you went from a super stressful situation to a super stressful situation.
Kind of. I and I don't, stress. I think the broadband is more of the frog in the water with the water going up. Elections is hyper stressful. So I'm not in any way trying to diminish the stress that everybody feels in broadband, but elections is its own kind of crazy.
Let's try to let's since you brought it up, let's marry the two of those though. So obviously election systems and processes from the technology behind voting has evolved, and there's obviously been lots of conversations about that in the last several years. Do you think there is any core, like, what do you think the access to more broadband, high-speed broadband, affordable broadband will change anything about the future election systems?
Yeah. So probably one of the more controversial things in elections and administration is voting over the internet. I'm a believer that's inevitable, and I've been saying that, probably for the last 20 years. And I mean, not quite 20. I mean, maybe 15. But the issue is you have military and overseas voters already vote over the internet,
Yeah.
and there's lots of concerns that there's no way you could make it secure. That's what you'd hear backwards. I believe if people believe that, we need smarter people to work on it, because I really disagree with that. All of us have money that we access through the internet, and if that's secure, I think your vote can be secure. And I would stop and say that I think that I've seen them nationwide. I mean, I've seen so many voting systems. I certified half the voting machines that are in the country right now.
Wow.
I feel 100% confident that everything is very secure, and I could go through all processes and explain why on a whole different time. I think the last thing you ever want to hear from a voting administrator is just trust me. And I think if anybody, even watching this, has any questions about elections in general, I would encourage them to talk to their local election official and go visit them. And I think they would be very impressed. I think that level of security that they have already, you want to have with voting over the internet. But I think typically what happens is we'll have a path of how we think adoption may happen in a lot of industries. And usually there's a big bang that changes that. And so somewhere I think there's going to be some sort of big bang that will make voting over the internet something that actually happens. And it may be through blockchain and all kinds of other things I don't know, but I think that's inevitable. Particularly, it may even be by phone because one of the things that's really helps out the argument that voting over the internet may occur is the tremendous demise of the United States Postal Service. That's not a sustainable model where people don't even think about mail a lot, but let alone voting by mail is going to have issues over time. Not the security stuff, not the crazy 2,000 mules, all that kind of stuff. I'm just saying
Yeah.
voting. Anyone watching this right now, and I'm sure the three of us would all know how often we get somebody else's mail at our mailbox, or our mail doesn't arrive. That kind of issue is probably as big of an issue or bigger than I think the security concerns people have with voting over the internet.
Oh yeah, we had 1,000 ballots in our primary elections in Kansas 2 months ago that didn't get delivered, that were delayed by weeks and then were not counted.
Yes,
So I will never vote by mail again, which is why I'm voting early tomorrow on my birthday.
Oh,
Already voted.
happy birthday!
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I did vote by mail though, because we're in Colorado, and Colorado it's very easy. It's always accurate. I've been done it for 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brian, let's pivot a little bit. This is called Broadband Heroes, and as I said, like you clearly are a broadband hero from our perspective. I'm curious, what do you think is like, what's your superpower? Like, what do you bring to the office? And I can tell you're very clearly a purpose-driven gentleman, and you're trying to do good. And I guess what is your superpower you're bringing to that movement and that purpose?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say that your standards for heroes must be pretty low, because I don't think that I'm actually a hero. You must have a really low bar. I don't know. I've said that. I don't know about superpower. I think, I don't know that I have such a thing. I would say though that just probably guiding day to day, I like to be doing things that are strategic, and so a lot of the positions and jobs I had at Sprint were that way, much more than operational jobs. I do believe that the ability to execute is the hardest thing. It's so like to be strategic, like to think of plans. In my mind, that's kind of the easiest thing to do. The harder thing to do is actually execute. And if you look at any business that's successful, that's where it comes down to. Anybody has great ideas, it's the execution. And then so working in elections for 10 years, or 11 years, that's a true operations job. Then it's a little different when it gets to federal state. But that is, if you want something done, ask an election administrator, because everything they live on is through calendars and timelines. And I mean, we had 69 elections in 11 years. So we had elections all the time. And so I think that helped me a lot. So I have the ability, I think, to kind of bridge the idea with the execution and think of it. Okay, we've conceived what we want to do and how are we going to get there. So I don't know if that's a superpower, but that is definitely
I'd say it's a power. It's a power that comes very valuable in dealing with the nuances of the broadband world, for sure.
Well, and I think especially in the context of BEAD, so much of the broadband office's work was surrounding the planning, right? We all got planning grants for digital equity and for BEAD. And then we had to pivot into execution. And that's where you saw some states really struggle. But I've always thought your superpower was your sense of humor, because you always crack me up when we're on a panel or just in a conversation on a webinar. You sit there so seriously, and then you just say something that
he's got a giant monkey head behind him.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so that is kind of the thing. We have in our home, this is a home office, we'll say puns, and then at some point, like you'll say a pun, the next person says pun, say pun, and if we ever get that mode where you can't one up them, I am a monkey's uncle. I bow to you and your punness. And so somewhere, I don't know how we came across that. We bought that mask, and that is to represent the monkey's uncle concept of puns. I don't know. I think I do have an ability to lead with my chin, which is sometimes bad and sometimes good, and sometimes that is just saying what maybe someone else is thinking and just saying it. So I don't know if that's, but I'd much rather always kind of cut to the chase for that than, I don't know, than let something fester. And I think it is that element of execution. And a good example is a lot of states are looking at devices, sending out devices, or device repair, repurposing old devices and then reconditioning them, getting them to people. And I truly think, the spin on the phrase, but one man's junk is another man's junk. It's not trash and treasure. It's sometimes trash is still trash when it's somewhere else. And if you get into some of those things at an execution level, you're going to find that you're really spending a lot of time on support, and you're really spending a lot of time on you'd be better off giving people a brand new device and saying, and for the same cost, longer term, and then you wouldn't have all that operational stuff. So device thing became really a romantic idea early on when I was in my job, and I know other states are doing it. And I started thinking immediately about the execution of that. Not that it might be good, but I just think the execution is not something that we can do. So to me, that is where I kind of get to thinking about the strategic and also the overall kind of the end game. And that's just one tiny thing within BEAD, because BEAD is full of deadlines and implementation. And
What are
Jade,
you
as you
what
know,
are you most worried about with BEAD right now?
I don't know that I'm worried. Well, if we want to go with worry, I don't want. I want to make sure that the carriers know we're fighting for them. So I would never want them to think that we're not. So that would be a worry. And if I felt that they weren't thinking that, I'd want to do whatever I can to demonstrate that, because obviously I have.
Maybe you should send them a monkey head to say, hey, we're not monkeying around. We care
We're
about
not. It's
you.
not. I'm your monkeys. Well, I think
Yeah.
I think they know, but I
Always
want to.
the marketing guy over here.
But I think that's that is a worry, because I think that is pivotal. That's central to our success, is having them know that we're on
Participate.
their side.
Yeah.
But in terms of other things, I don't know that I worry. I just eyes open. I mean, I'm today's just a crazy day as I'm looking at what digital equity, and I'm thinking, I really think that it's going to take a year for NTIA to approve our final proposal. And
Wow.
I'm starting to think that's optimistic. And I have no doubt. I just why would anything? It's one of these things. Do we even have to finish the sentence? That's taken 5 months so far in DE. It took them 9 months in the initial proposal.
Yep.
What is it about? What is the concept of fool me once, shame on me kind of thing? I mean, what is it that would suggest that they won't take that long, other than potentially a different sheriff in town, which could very well happen in a
I
couple
guess
weeks. I mean,
I guess I'm curious on that note. I mean, is obviously, yeah, it's the long, but like, is it the fact that they don't see it as a crisis? They don't see the urgency, or is it just it's pure bureaucracy?
well, I think this kind of sums up a lot of what we've been saying, and it became evident just even with some of the things the assistant secretary has been saying lately about the time frame. The leadership at NTIA is political, and so you have people who, I think, that's what I said. I mean, I think you have people who are there and are very capable of driving the implementation, but something's not connected there. And so I have to look at leadership and the process that they've developed. I don't know what else. And that's where it gets into transparency. If we had more discussions about some of those items, how could we make it faster? Because they have the resources, they have the dollars.
Yeah.
I just don't know where they're going.
Let me ask you, again, you've a very diverse background. I think you have a unique perspective. So let's look out and use your strategic planning mind and think 10 years from now. What do you see broadband as in 10 years?
I would start with saying that I think in our state, the focus is on fiber. We want to see 100% fiber to all locations. I remember at this point now, 20 years ago, with the thought that we wouldn't have wired phones at the office, and that seemed crazy. So I don't know where, I don't know that wireless will be ubiquitous even in our homes, and we won't have any devices connected. I don't know how that'll be. I think fiber will still be kind of the underlying technology that way. But there are other technologies that might emerge, and wireless may end up becoming something much better than it is today. And I'm not saying it's bad today. I'm just saying that's not our jam in North Dakota right now.
Yeah.
It's not the gold
But
standard.
yeah, and I mean, I remember at a time at Sprint, there was a route that, because Sprint was 100% fiber optic except for one actually microwave dish somewhere, but everyone else was 100% fiber optic. But there was a route through a mountain area that was hitting capacity. And then multi-division wave multiplexing came up, was just invented and saved the day. Like, who knew if that hadn't happened, there was a large part of Sprint that would have been kind of basically cut out of the network. So there's probably something like that that could come up. I've thought a lot about the surgery I had, and it was, the doctor was across the room. It was the Da Vinci thing, the whole
Yeah.
Hmm.
deal, and he's kind of moving the
Robot.
joysticks or whatever. And
Mhm.
so what if that could happen? What if someone was in Fargo, the doctor was in Fargo, and there was the ambulatory unit was in Dickinson, North Dakota, and they could do that surgery remotely like that. Seems very frightening, but what if they
And that
could?
latency better be real good.
Yeah.
Right. And apparently, though, there is some of that going on in terms of when you have disasters. I don't know if it's that good, but it's not as crazy of an idea as it could be already. So maybe that kind of thing could be, like the two things that I think are people don't dig into them enough as the phrases is digital divide. What's that mean? I question that. And some of these things, it's kind of like when in Forrest Gump, when they talk about shrimp and you find out and have Bubba Gump
Yeah.
start giving like 30 versions of
Yeah.
different types of shrimp. That same kind of thing. And the other one is telemedicine. So
Hmm.
people will say that, okay, great. We all think, all right, I can have a equivalent of a FaceTime Teams meeting with my doctor. But what else could that mean? And what else? How impactful could that be? And I say all that because, like, there's a lot of belief that people don't have internet because they can't afford it. I
Right.
think that there's a lot of data that says that's not true. And the number one reason, using NTIA's own research, why people don't have internet at home is they don't see a need. And they don't see a need often because they may not have a computer. They may have everything they need through an iPad, and they can either use the little T-Mobile pod or something like that. They don't see the need for internet the way we think of it. And so what does that mean? The group that thinks that a lot often are either older people or very young people. So that when you're asking about 10 years out, I mean, I think some of those drivers, this is kind of where I get to, where is that? There has to be a lot of data that way. When we were kids, you're reading stuff from Southwestern Bell about how you'll have picture phones someday.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you're reading that as a grade school, so
Yeah.
people have imagined these things, and I don't see that imagination right now that's driving some of the execution. And all we talk about is 100 over 20 or symmetrical gig. I mean,
It's a lot of infrastructure talk and not a lot about how you're using it.
and that's what kind of, as a government, I think executing a program, that's what we should do. But I think it's kind of the Paula Cole, where have all the cowboys gone? I think there is I'm not convinced that they're not there. They're just maybe hiding behind bushes. But I think the industry, even the government people, would benefit from seeing and hearing from these visionaries about where they're seeing
Yeah.
that industry. And in
That
terms of
is
end
that's
user
an amazing
applications,
idea. That actually that's an awesome idea. I think you're so right. Like touch it, feel it, use it, embrace it to get inspired to like, hey, this is what we should be working on.
everything. So I think in digital equity, I think we're really hung up on, pick how to sign up for a utility online or something. And I think everything starts with the end user, and I really believe that we should be focusing on what are those end user applications that will change things. And
Yeah.
I don't know that I know all those.
Brian, do you think you're going to have any money left over to work on things like that, or is all of your money going into access infrastructure?
I personally would like it to go into access. I think that one of the things about BEAD is it's a bit of a similar to other government programs. It's kind of like a sleeves off your vest. I mean, we're dropping down locations without doing anything. Probably by the time people see this, we'll have our outcome from an NTIA, and we're going to be about 2,000 locations. I
Wow,
can
that's
I
not
can look
very many.
no, I can look at what we've done with CPF and ARPA, and that's about the same, and how much money we spent. And even if you double it, because we would like to figure out, one of our leading thoughts right now is, could we make a case with the notice of funding opportunity language that any of those locations is the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back, and therefore we need some upstream investment to support that last mile. So if we can pull that off, that would help the carrier infrastructure and help out the state. So even if you doubled what we've spent in CPF, we're still going to probably have about $30 million, $40 million.
Oh, wow.
So
So you will have money left over.
yeah. So what, I mean, kind of unrelated, but related. My concern is that that dollar amount will be so large per location, and we want to be fiber. That is that's where we're going. That we will get extreme pressure from NTIA to reduce that dramatically and go with fixed wireless or Starlink. And so I'm concerned about that so much. I've been raising that to them because I figure like if I say it now, they'll either I just put the idea in their head or they will tell me and they have that that's not what's going to happen. But I'd rather keep raising it so that I can remind them that we've had that discussion. So we could have a lot more money left over, but then that would be very frustrating because we definitely want to hit all those locations with fiber, and we think we are
Yeah.
uniquely positioned to do it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I know we've been talking for a while. I want to be respectful of your time, but I do have a question. Who do you think? Who are your heroes? Do you have some other heroes or people in the industry that you think are champions as well and are doing good work? Like, who do you think that we should also be looking at and digging into how they're doing it to bring more broadband to more people?
Well, I don't know that I've thought about that too much. I think, if you've been doing this series, I can tell you that the people who are the broadband state office leaders, I think are all awesome. I think they're all great. And uh, I said this to Jade or typed this to Jade once, but I mean, when I first started, I asked someone at a company that's both in North Dakota and in Kansas, hey, who I'm new here. Who does a
New
good
guy.
job? And I mean, he couldn't have said Jade's name fast enough. And so that's been, I think you're lucky to have her there with your company. I think the carriers are all, I think they're all trying to do the right thing by getting service to end users. So I think to me, those are my friends.
Yeah.
I don't know about overall. I think it'd be. I don't know. I don't know that beyond that, other than to say, I think we would all benefit by trying to find just some visionaries in the industry and trying to learn as much as we can, not from the experience side, which we've done, but
Yeah.
from where they see the applications going. And I think those individuals who emerge are probably the heroes. Kind of like doctors. Doctors save lives, but they don't really save lives at the same level as scientists do.
Yeah.
Scientists are the ones who save lives, because they come up with cures.
I always say that we should look to children, right? I mean, you looked at what children are doing with like how they look at the world, how they're using applications today. Like, I mean, we joke about, TikTok or Instagram or any social media stuff, but the reality is the way in which different generations are using technology is a leading indicator for what's
Yeah.
possible. Like, we just have to, our job as leaders and visionaries is to how do you translate that into something that does have a greater good.
Or have as many experiences as you can. So I mean, to that point, like my daughter was one of these Harry Potter, read every book the day it came out kind of thing. My son was like, I can see the movie. It's so much more efficient. So he really learned, I think, to read on the internet. And now you have babies, literally babies, who have tablets, and that's how that's their life. And so I don't know what that means to that kind of thing in broadband either. I kind of think if this were 10, 15 years ago, whenever I'd speak to a class of people who were young adults, I'd be like, hey, people expect you to know technology better than anyone, so learn it, because often they didn't. I
Yeah.
don't know when you're saying children, I mean, if you've grown up with a tablet in your hand from the beginning, I don't know, maybe that's just like TV, I don't know, but I have a feeling your experiences, your needs are going to be different, and your expectations and how fast you'd adopt to something would be so much faster than we could conceive.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's an interesting to think about. I guess the other thing that pops into my head is, I mean, obviously we're called broadband heroes, but I even think about the terminology, right? Broadband is an industry term from my perspective, right? Most
Yeah.
people don't like, I mean, I've been in the industry a long time. We understand these terminologies, and Ivan, you mentioned DWDM. Like, I actually understand the technology part, but to somebody that's not, I mean, you don't typically, I don't know if your son or daughter, hey, do we have broadband? I mean, they probably don't use those words. Well, maybe they're for you, but it's your role. But
They're like,
do
the
you think
internet's not working.
yeah, the internet, the Wi-Fi is down. Like, I mean, do you think
Mhm.
the terminology actually we should be trying to move some of the terminology even downstream so it makes it even easier for people?
Well, I think kind of. We used broadband for life as our kind of theme in North Dakota, mostly because we didn't just want to use internet for all, and that was already being used. But um, that internet for all makes much more sense. And there's a new, it's not really new. It's Morgan Stanley does a review or a survey every year. It's the eighth version that just came out, and it talks about how people they have different technologies and why would they leave, and generally they would leave only for price more so than any other reason, except for DSL. They have DSL, they would leave for quality. But to a large degree, we have this kind of religious war discussion of fixed wireless or fiber, and to an end user, it's just internet.
Yeah.
And so they
Mhm.
don't. That to me means that beyond everything else, internet is a commodity. That's how people think of it. I have to have it. And so you're right. They probably don't know broadband, but what it means as a commodity, probably we haven't really gotten our heads around either.
You're actually one of the first people I've ever heard say, a lot of the analogy is around the electric, right? And you're one of the first
Yeah.
people who said, don't like change that mindset. And I actually, it's a damn good point.
You know what's interesting, which you'll edit all this out, I'm sure, please. But everybody talks about broadband's a utility, but like growing up, there were several months where we couldn't afford our electric bill, so we just didn't have electricity. And we couldn't afford our water bill, which was a municipal utility. And so it's like it's not ever going to be ubiquitous unless it's totally free. And if we can't even deliver free water and electricity,
Although
anyway.
I would imagine some people of a certain age will probably say the internet is more important than water.
Probably.
But
But
yeah,
yeah,
that's a
I
good
mean,
point.
Well,
It's a
so I
good
guess
point.
I'm just saying I get where you're coming from, Brian. It's not quite the same.
but it's a good example though, because I mean there's several issues there because so first of all, the whole idea from being, when I started at Sprint, I was on the local phone side, and that universal service was the objective, and the
Yep.
idea was that everybody had a phone. So phones were subsidized, local service was subsidized by long
Yeah.
distance, and so it'd be, you'd have $15 a month for phone service for that very reason. That the belief was you had to be able to have a phone, and
Yeah.
so
911.
even before then, I mean, it just that was the that was the thought process. I think that kind of gets into some of the politics though with all utilities, and that how much of it goes to your local government already. I've been pushing for on grants, on the NTIA grants, you have to pay income tax. And so federal income tax, I can't control if it can argue that it shouldn't apply, but I was trying to see if we could get states to not have it. Our income tax is really low in North Dakota. And it's kind of bizarre that I'm trying to make that case when I'm looking at my North Dakota bill and there's a state sales tax on the bill. And so we tax the service that already end users are getting. I don't know why we would have a problem waiving this little 2% on the other side. Communities like Kansas, they all have franchise fees.
Yeah.
We don't really have those as often in North Dakota, but also some communities in Kansas tax your electricity. Some don't.
Hmm.
Some do it like Fairway used to tax electricity in the winter and gas in the summer, but not the other way around. And once those taxes apply, they're really hard to turn off as a governing body.
Yeah.
I was on city council in Shawnee, and we looked into that. And so I mean, there's so many other facets to that affordability as well that communities could do. So I definitely think it's utility. I just
Yeah.
don't think it's like electricity. And even that electricity aspect, if you notice, that even becomes a political thing said by one party or another.
Yeah.
So that's another reason why I'd rather us have our own analogy and our own thought process about it.
Well, Brian, thank you so much. I know you might think our bar is low, but obviously, I think looking at your background, we do consider you a broadband hero. We're very appreciative of everything you've done for North Dakota and for just in general in your political and private ventures. So thank you again for being on. Thank you, Jade, again for participating. And if you can watch further episodes on YouTube or Spotify, and we will see you next time. Thank you again, Brian.
Thank you.